When the battle around Midway Atoll finally ceased, the U.S. fleet tallied its losses. Over the course of 3 days of intense action in the air, on the ground, and at sea, 324 sailors, Marines, and aviators had been killed. Additionally, 64 U.S. aviators were missing in action. All of these men had to ditch their aircraft because their planes had suffered significant battle damage or they had run out of fuel during their return flight. In the end, 22 of these men were never recovered, bringing the total American death toll up to 346. The crew that endured the longest ordeal out on the ocean belonged to Torpedo Squadron 6. During the June 4th attack against the Quito Butai, a torpedo bomber flown by machinist Walt Winchell and Radioman Douglas Cossitt had been badly damaged. As it fled the scene, it started streaming gasoline, and despite the best efforts of its pilot, it could fly no higher than 1,000 feet. Winchell and Cossitt were forced to ditch their aircraft in the empty Pacific, miles away from either fleet. After it skidded into the water, the plane sank in approximately 30 seconds. Winchell and Cossitt managed to evacuate and inflate their 8-foot life raft, taking with them their first aid kits, 4 cans of pemmican, 2 packages of malted milk, and both parachutes. Cossitt had been wounded by 18 pieces of shrapnel, but he held out hope that a Navy search plane would find their raft. Optimistic about his chances of being recovered, he recalled,
"The remainder of that day, we kept thinking that we would spot search planes. The following day, we did see planes in the distance, but they were too far away to be able to identify. Of course, at this time, we did not know the outcome of the battle. From the way our planes were being knocked down during the battle, we wouldn't have taken bets either way."
The next few days passed in sheer agony. A blazing sun burned their skins, they grew weary due to lack of food and water, and shark attacks scared them half to death.
We were constantly bothered by sharks. If we looked down in the water and saw lots of small fish milling around our boat, then we knew it was okay. We would even lower ourselves into the water and cool off. However, if in looking into the water, no little fish were around, then watch out. Sure enough, every time we would spot a fin circling around us. Sometimes there were 2 or 3 at one time. Pretty soon they would make a run at us. Because we didn't draw over an inch of water, the sharks would have to come right to the surface, then roll over to try to get a bite at us. We fought them off with an 8-inch Bowie knife and our aluminum oars. One time, Walt cut one bad enough to make him bleed. The biggest damn fight took place they ever saw about 20 yards from our boat. The other sharks jumped that one that Walt wounded. Of course, we were hoping that they would all kill each other.
Winchell and Cossitt survived by drinking rainwater, and they even killed an albatross and ate it raw. Intermittently, a U.S. search plane appeared on the horizon, but the pilots always failed to spot them.
When we saw planes in the distance, we tried to signal them, but to no avail. If they had not changed course, they might have passed over us. They were about 7 or 8 miles away when they changed course. This was very heartbreaking, but we didn't mention it to each other. Instead, I can remember Walt yelling at them, "All right, you bastards, see if I ever buy you a drink at the officers' club." Walt had just made warrant officer before Midway. I have thought many times over the years that it was this attitude that helped us more than anything. We never gave up, and we never forgot how to laugh.
On June 16th, the 12th day of their ordeal, a Japanese submarine surfaced nearby, and the enemy sailors unmasked their guns. For a few tense minutes, Winchell and Cossitt believed their time had come.
About the 12th day, we spotted a submarine on the surface. The sea was kind of rough, at least for a rubber boat, and the only time we could see it was when we rode over the crest of a wave. I held Walt's legs, and he stood up and waved to attract their attention. Finally, they saw us, and the sub turned in our direction. When it was broadside, we saw our mistake. It was Japanese.
One of their Type I boats.
Walt sat down and we just waited for the end. We were sure that they would either take us prisoner or shoot us in the boat. They circled us at about 50 feet. 2 officers and about 8 or 10 crew members came on deck to look at us. The machine guns and rifles the crew carried looked like they meant business. However, after looking at us, they probably figured we couldn't last much longer anyway, so they sailed off and submerged. We never saw a periscope or anything after that, but Walt and I were both sure that they were in the vicinity, possibly waiting for a ship which would stop to pick us up, and they were using us for bait. Regardless of their reason, we were damn glad to see them go.
The Japanese submarine sailed off, leaving the ocean to kill the men. For the next 5 days, Winchell's and Cossitt's health and spirits began to diminish. Cossitt described what happened next.
We had been out of water for 2 days, and there was no rain in sight. On the morning of June 21st, we awoke to find a sea of glass, absolutely no breeze of any kind. We pulled the silk parachute over us to protect us from the sun. We both knew we couldn't last much longer, but we never mentioned it to each other. Instead, we made plans on what we were going to do when we were found. My folks had some property at Lake Tahoe, and we were going to go there and drink the damn lake dry. We talked about the Dole Pineapple Cannery in Honolulu, where they have ice-cold pineapple juice coming out of the drinking fountains. We told each other how good baked beans were for breakfast, and I swore that I would never turn them down again. Suddenly, we both heard it at the same time, an airplane. There could be no mistake about the sound. By the way the engines were spitting and backfiring, there was only one plane in the whole world that sounded like that, a PBY. The pilot told us after that he was circling us at about 100 feet, but we couldn't see him. Our eyes were so sunburned, the plane was only a blur.
After spending 17 days at sea, Winchell and Cossitt were rescued. An American PBY flown by Lieutenant J.G. John White spotted their life raft and landed. The plane flew the 2 men back to Midway Island, 360 miles to the south. En route to Midway, the PBY crewmen told Winchell and Cossitt that the United States had won the Battle of Midway.
This was the first that we knew the outcome of the Battle of Midway, and it was going to be many days and weeks before we were to find out the cost the torpedo squadrons from the Enterprise, Yorktown, and Hornet paid. We were flown to Midway, and then we found out that we were picked up on the very last day of their intensified search. After a week in the field hospital at Midway, we were flown to Pearl Harbor and to the Naval Hospital. I weighed 119 pounds, and Walt weighed 112. It took over 10 years to regain my original weight of 185 pounds. This kept me buying new uniforms about every year until the war was over.
Winchell and Cossitt were the last 2 aviators rescued after the Battle of Midway. Both men survived the battle by at least 3 decades. Cossitt died in 1980 at age 61. Winchell died in 1990 at age 78. 22 other aviators were never found. They suffered a long, lonely death out on the ocean. Lost at sea, they never had the opportunity to know that their Navy had won the day. Like hundreds of others, they made the ultimate sacrifice. On this anniversary, let us commemorate that sacrifice and attempt to repay our debt of eternal gratitude.